Welcome everybody to this edition of Ireland and Carlow's Past podcast. My name is David Whelan. This edition will look at the life and times of Michael Collins as voted by you. I'm not going to say a whole lot now, so what I am going to say is sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you at the end. Michael Collins, born 1890, 16th of October, died 22nd of August 1922. Michael Collins was born in a farmhouse in Woodfield, near Clonakilty, County Cork. He was the youngest of 8 children. His father, also Michael, and an old man by the time youngest son Michael came along, lived long enough to instill a sense of Irishness and a strong identity and reverence for all things Irish and his Irish culture. Michael Collins' father passed away in 1897, aged 83, when Michael was only 6 years old. Michael's mother, Mary Ann O'Brien, was many years younger than her husband, but it seems very devoted to both her husband and her children and their family life. She also heavily influenced Michael with her work ethic and her commitment to the Irish cause. She died the 14th of April 1907, aged 54. Michael's parents had been a definite influence on his early life, and this, as we will see, translates into his later life. Also, he had many educators who heavily influenced his life and nationalistic ideals. Influential teacher such as Dennis Lyons and a local blacksmith named James Santry. Michael took the civil service exams and passed them, and in 1906, at the age of 15, he went to London and worked in the Post Office Savings Bank. He did study law at King's College, but he did not finish his degree. While in London, Collins becomes more involved in the Irish nationalist ideals, joining organisations as the Gaelic League GAA, where he played hurling. And in 1909 he was sworn into the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a secret society who wished to achieve Irish independence through revolutionary means. He was influenced by the writings of Arthur Griffith, founder of Sinn Féin, and then Michael himself became a member. In 1914 he joined the Irish Volunteers of the London branch of the Irish Volunteers and rose to the rank of staff captain. England's difficulties were often seen as Ireland's opportunities. The Easter Rising of 1916 is set against the backdrop of Britain's involvement in World War I with Germany. The Rising was an insurrection against British rule in Ireland. Home rule had been promised to Ireland if Irish men would take up arms with Britain. However, tensions in Ireland grew, with no implementation of the Home Rule Bill, and with Britain demanding conscripts from Ireland. The Rising was organised and planned by the Military Council of the Irish Republican Brotherhood and key figures such as Pádraig Pearse, Thomas Clarke, James Connolly, Sean McDermott, Joseph Plunkett, Eamon Cant and Thomas MacDonagh. These 7 men also signed the Proclamation of the Irish Republic, which was read out loud outside the GPO Dublin to stunned onlookers who were not aware of what was happening on that Easter Monday morning. Other key organisations involved in the Rising involved the Irish Volunteers, the Irish Citizen Army and Cumann na mBan. While the Rising was a brave attempt at Irish freedom, it was foolhardy, and despite how we view it today, it was a very unpopular decision amongst the public at the time. The rising lasted from April 24th to April 29th. The Irish forces were overpowered by a much stronger, highly trained British army. And once executions had started from Kilmainham jail of the Irish rising leaders, public opinion began to change and their sympathies to the rising and its leaders began. This began a period of Irish history which still influences us today and paved the way of future leaders in Ireland's cause, such as Michael Collins. Michael Collins was involved in the rising, but was not seen as a key figure. He mobilised with the Irish Volunteers and was positioned in the GPO, the rebellion's headquarters, where he served as aide-de-camp to Joseph Plunkett, his personal assistant and bodyguard. He did partake in fighting, and while he did participate in the rising, he was very critical of the sacrificial and idealistic tactics of some of the leaders. Following the rising, Collins was arrested and interned in Frangach prison in Wales, where he rose to prominence as a leader. Following the rising of 1916, 1,863 men were sent to Frangach prison camp without trial. Collins, along with Arthur Gifford, were imprisoned there. Many of the inmates kept order, and the prison became known as the University of Revolution. It was here that the seeds of the next few years in Irish history were sown. Frangach prison was closed in December 1916, and the inmates were released and returned to Ireland with the ideals of Irish republicanism reborn. Following on from the release of the Irish prisoners from Frangach prison, elections in 1918 took place. Sinn Féin was advocating for an independent Ireland and the establishment of the Irish Republic. They overwhelmed the Irish electorate, and following on from the 1916 rising and executions, it seemed to have left an appetite for the Irish people to want Irish freedom. Michael Collins was elected MP for South Cork. After the election of 1918, Sinn Féin MPs refused to take their seats in Westminster, and on January the 21st, 1919, at the Mansion House, Dublin, the first Dáil commenced, and it was here that an Irish Republic was declared. Eamon de Valera was elected as the Dáil's president, and Michael Collins became Minister for Finance. Having declared Ireland a republic in the first Dáil, it was only inevitable that the British government would not accept this declaration from its closest neighbour. So what was to ensue was the Irish War of Independence. Many would argue that it was during the War of Irish Independence that Michael Collins came to the fore as one of its most influential leaders in history. The War of Independence lasted for 2 years, and it was during this time that many famous or infamous events took place. But Michael Collins is attributed to have been the brains behind the operations, along with his right-hand man and friend Harry Boland. Evidence would strongly suggest that Ireland were incapable of standing toe-to-toe with Britain. Collins knew this, and he knew that open warfare would not work and would leave them extremely vulnerable. Collins had learned the lessons of the 1916 rising: intelligence gathering, intelligent networks, the gathering and obtaining of firearms, and the training of Irish forces against the British soldiers. New tactics of fighting, guerrilla warfare. The Irish Republican Army, the IRA, carried out raids for arms and funds on British establishments such as the RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary. They were the police force of the time. They also targeted prominent members of the British establishment, such as its first victim, the resident magistrate John C. Milling, who was shot and killed in Westport County Mayo, as he had sent Irish volunteers to prison for unlawful assemblies and drilling. One of the war's major successes was that of the flying columns. These were mobile armed units numbering between 10 to 30 men, and, as already stated, they were acting with guerrilla warfare tactics. The units were comprised of in local areas by local men who it was deemed understood the territory and terrain. This meant that mounting attacks on British forces, such as ambushing, was more feasible. They were highly disciplined, striking their targets and disappearing quickly. They caused disruptions to the British forces, but all of this, of course, heavily relied on the intelligence and the information they received. The squad, nicknamed the 12 Apostles and formed by Michael Collins, were responsible for assassinations of British intelligence agents, focusing on members of the Dublin Metropolitan's G Division. The Cairo gang killings, the assassination of British intelligence officers, took place on the 21st of November 1920. Collins had instructed the squad to go out and assassinate them in the early hours of that morning. Later that day, in reprisal, the British forces entered Croke Park and opened fire on the spectators during a match between Dublin and Tipperary. 16 intelligence officers were killed and 14 spectators were killed in Croke Park, and one more died later from their injuries, leaving the death toll at 31 on what became known as Bloody Sunday. With Collins and the Irish gaining momentum in the War of Independence, the Royal Irish Constabulary, under severe pressure with resignations and low recruitments, the British acted with a recruitment policy of their own. They recruited the Blackened Hands. The Blackened Hands are so called because of the uniforms they wore. They wore dark green jackets and khaki coloured trousers. They were recruited from ex-British soldiers. They were infiltrated into the RIC. There can be no doubt that the Blackened Hands were a controversial group in Irish history. During the War of Independence, they were known for their severe actions not only against IRA prisoners and IRA forces, but also against Irish civilians. Also, during this period, the British also recruited a more controversial group, the Auxiliaries, who also were known for their mistreatment of IRA prisoners and Irish civilians. As stated, many incidents happened during the War of Independence, but after much fighting and disorder, a truce, however fragile, was declared in July of 1921. It's widely accepted that this truce was of a good timing, as Irish firearms were in short supply, and open warfare, ordered by De Valera, was clearly not working. It was a good time for a truce. Once a truce had been called, negotiations began between the British and the Irish, between Britain's Prime Minister David Lloyd George and Ireland's Eamon de Valera, President of the Irish Republic. The negotiations failed to bring about any level of agreement, and although many opinions and many ideas are formed, it is to be remembered that during this period it would form the political landscape of Ireland for decades to come. It is fair to say that Michael Collins remained aloof of the British during the War of Independence, and while stories of him riding around Dublin on a bicycle and being led into Dublin Castle to read British files are well documented, it must be clear Collins was a thorn in the British side. Once negotiations began, his own autonomy were released. It would now become a different world for Michael Collins. With Eamon de Valera and David Lloyd George failing to reach any level of agreement, a new tact was decided upon. And in 1921, on the 11th of October, an Irish delegation led by Arthur Griffith, Minister for Foreign Affairs, began negotiations with the British government. Collins, against his better judgment, was also part of the negotiations team. The negotiations were long, arduous and treacherous, with threats of war remaining on the table. And on the 6th of December 1921, in the early hours, a treaty was signed. Michael Collins, upon signing it, is said to have said, "I have just signed my own death warrant." Let it be clear that De Valera was not present during these negotiations, and this is problematic in future events. Key points in the treaty were establishment of an Irish Free State, continued British influence in Ireland, partition of Ireland, even though the Northern Ireland Parliament of the time voted against entering the Free State. The Boundary Commission, and of course one of the main bones of contention, the oath of allegiance to the Crown. The Treaty of 1921 was definitely the trigger which led to the Civil War in Ireland. It left families divided, fathers to fight sons and brothers to fight brothers. With the treaty signed, it now had to be ratified by the Irish government, and after much debate in the Dáil, the treaty was ratified by a margin of 64 to 57 in favour of the treaty. This ultimately led to a split in the government with Eamon de Valera and his anti-treaty members. Along with him, they left the Dáil in protest. In April 1922, anti-treaty militants took over the Four Courts in Dublin. The Free State was in its infancy, and this was seen as an opportunity to strike against the institutions of an infant state. In a hotly contested general election of 1922, anti-treaty candidates were heavily defeated. They only received 21.8% of the national vote. Of course, one would think that this should have ended the debate, and Ireland would be left to continue to carry on with matters of state. But no, on the 22nd of June 1922, British Army Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson was shot dead at the steps of his own home in London. This caused the British government to tell the new Free State, deal with the anti-treaty rebels in the Four Courts, or we will. And within 6 days, civil war began in Ireland. The role of Michael Collins in the Civil War was as Commander-in-Chief of the Irish Free State Army. He led this army against the IRA, his former comrades, men he had fought alongside with in the War of Independence. The Free State Army was supplied arms and artillery by the British government, and after bombing the Four Courts, the rebels or irregulars were forced to surrender. After some initial battles, the Free State Army adopted guerrilla warfare tactics. The Irish public seemed to be in full support of the Free State Army, and this made it difficult for the IRA to continue. It is estimated casualties from 1,000 to 2,000 men were killed. In May 1923, the IRA called for a ceasefire, thus ending the Civil War. Among the casualties was Michael Collins. Michael Collins was killed on the 22nd of August 1922. He was 31 years old. He was in Cork visiting. Some say he was there trying to reconcile with anti-treaty supporters, or maybe assessing his troops in the region. However, in an ambush at Bailnablaw, he was shot by anti-treaty supporters. After a 30-minute engagement, there are many stories and theories surrounding his death, but what remains is in the death his impact on the remainder of the Civil War and probably the future of Ireland to the present day. He said the treaty was a tool for Ireland to build with, for a nation to grow. Eamon de Valera, anti-treaty, went on to become Taoiseach of Ireland and President eventually. He apparently has said, "It is my considered opinion that in the fullness of time, history will record the greatness of Michael Collins, and it will be recorded at my expense." Michael Collins' funeral in Dublin took place on the 28th of August, 1922. 500,000 people lined the streets to pay their respects. And for a moment in the Civil War, the nation was united in grief. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed what you've just watched. I know I enjoyed making it. I enjoyed doing the research and learned things that maybe I didn't know about or things I'd forgotten about. And one of the sources of research would have been books and the internet. Just to mention a few of the books, not because we're making anything out of it, but if you're looking for something interesting to read on Michael Collins, Medder Ryan's The Day Michael Collins Was Shot. It's quite a good book. I have this a few years and I often nip back and forth through that. Another book by Tim Pat Coogan is simply called Michael Collins. Once again, it's probably the go-to book for a lot of people, even though some of the information may be questionable, not sure. Also, two books that I came across in the course of researching was, I found these actually on Amazon, on Amazon. This one, Michael Collins, The Big Fellow, is probably aimed at younger kids. If you were looking to introduce your kids to Irish historical figures, they actually have a series of them. I've seen one on Roger Casement, I think there's another one on Eamon de Valera and stuff like that. But this one is called The Big Fellow, and that's by Rod Smith, and it's from Nutshell Heroes. But you'll find it on Amazon. Also on Amazon, I found this one, which is probably aimed towards maybe teenagers, young adults kind of age group. The Pocket Book of Michael Collins, Life, Death and Legacy, also on Amazon. Quite an interesting look. It's full of pictures, full of information, and good information. Again, haven't read it cover to cover, but I did have a little nose dive into it, and it seems to be quite good. Right, that being said, these two are going to be involved in a competition. Excuse me. These two are going to be involved in a competition that will be posted across our two Facebook pages, our group page and our page. So keep an eye out for that. Also, just to conclude on this edition of our podcast, it was a pleasure putting this together. Like I said, I learned a lot, things I'd forgotten about, and I know there's a lot of stuff that we didn't put in, such as prison breaks and Kitty Kiernan and probably I would have liked to have done a bit more on Harry Boland maybe. But look, what I've done here is I've tried to put together a podcast where we get a brief overview of his life, and hopefully, as I always say, it inspires you to maybe look further into the man himself. We will be doing future podcasts on this period of Irish history, such as the Easter Rising, the War of Independence, the treaty, and we actually I have big plans for that one, and of course the Civil War and the aftermath of the Civil War and how that has left, I suppose, if you like, still a cloud hanging over us in this country. If you're watching us on Facebook, please give us a like and share. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us greatly at everything we're trying to do here at Ireland and Carlow's podcast page, and helps us to do future stuff. So look, guys, as I always say, take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves, and we'll see you for the next edition.